I'm 63. I should be traveling through Tuscany with Sarah right now. Instead, I'm alone in Truro, Massachusetts, trying to convince myself this isn't the end. When cancer took Sarah a year ago, it didn't just take her. It took all the color out of my life. Everything turned gray, like this November ocean. I taught history at Boston University. My specialty? Stories of great loss. Now I'm a walking textbook myself. I bought this house because it was abandoned and broken, just like me. It sits on a cliff near the old Helena Lighthouse. They say that light shines not for ships, but for lost souls. I fit the description. My first night was cold and loud. The Atlantic here doesn't whisper, it screams. I walked around the house. The old floorboards groaned. And then I noticed it. Under the closet in the bedroom Sarah and I planned to furnish, there was a crack. But it wasn't just a crack. It was a perfectly straight line in the wood. I removed the baseboard. Beneath it was a piece of darkened oak secured to a beam. I used a chisel. 10 minutes later, I had in my hands a small, hidden wooden box. Inside lay two things: an old, brass navigational sextant and a small, leather-bound journal. The sextant was cold. The journal smelled of salt and thyme. I opened it. The date on the first page, 1968. The handwriting was feminine but very firm. I started reading, and every line hit me harder than the storm outside. It was the diary of Esther. She lived here half a century ago. November 1968. Today marks exactly 3 months since my Bert didn't return. The Coast Guard closed the case. They said it was a storm. I know that isn't true. Bert was the best sailor on Cape Cod. He didn't drown. He was taken for what he knew. I looked around. The house I bought to slowly die in suddenly came alive. It was filled with someone else's, yet very familiar, pain. Esther wrote about fear, about people who came to her asking for the maps and making threats. Then she wrote, "I hid them where no one would think to look, where the light cannot reach the water. Bert will return and he will understand. Until then, I will simply wait by the lighthouse." The maps? I wondered. I looked around again. No maps, just the sextant and the journal. I had to figure this out. This mystery felt more alive than my own grief. The next day, I drove into town. Provincetown, the heart of Cape Cod. Narrow streets, old houses. I needed the history, the local archives. I found an old, dusty bookstore, Books and Shore. A woman met me. She looked about 55, with gray hair pulled back and surprisingly warm gray eyes. "Can I help you? You look new. You look like a man searching for a missing chapter," she said with a faint smile. I introduced myself. "I'm Tom. I bought the old cottage in Truro, near the lighthouse. I'm looking for records about a family who lived there in the 1960s, Bert and Esther." Her smile vanished. Her eyes hardened. "Bert and Esther," she repeated. "I'm Emily, and my father knew Bert. That's a story Cape Cod doesn't like to remember." I knew pain, the kind of pain that hardens people. Emily pulled back, as if I had named not a person, but an old, open wound. I realized if I wanted her to talk, I had to open my own chapter. I had to show her my vulnerability first. "Emily," I said quietly, "I'm not a journalist or a detective. I'm just trying to feel alive again. My wife, Sarah, died a year ago. Cancer. We planned this retirement for 20 years. Now I'm here, searching for meaning in a stranger's house." I found Esther's journal. And I feel her pain. It's the same pain, Emily, the pain of an unfinished story. Emily stopped. She looked at me, and the ice in her eyes finally cracked. It was the first time I saw the real person beneath the bookseller's polite exterior. My father, Jones, was a fisherman. He was the last person to see Bert's boat in November '68. Emily's voice dropped. Everyone on Cape Cod thought Bert ran off with money. He was a lighthouse keeper. He knew all the smuggling routes. But my father knew Bert, and he knew Bert would never leave Esther. I pulled the sextant from my jacket. I found this with the journal. Emily took the sextant. Her fingers traced the cold brass gently. That's the Hunter. Bert always called it that. He bought it at an auction in Newport. He said it wasn't just a tool. It was a memory. She handed it back. Bert wasn't just a lighthouse keeper. He served in the Navy during the war. He was a code breaker. He knew how to hide what shouldn't be found, or how to find what was lost. Esther mentioned the maps, I said. Maps she hid. They are important. My house on Cape Cod sits on top of a secret. Emily pondered this. Her gray eyes narrowed in concentration. My father knew one place Bert went constantly. It's an old, abandoned whaling station in Provincetown, right by the bay. There was a control booth there. Bert and my father often talked about how they needed to hide the light. I knew then our goals were the same. I was looking for purpose, and Emily was looking for the truth about her friends and perhaps her father's honor. I'm a historian, I said, pulling out my notebook. I'm good with codes and symbols. You know the territory. Let's finish their story, Emily. She nodded. For the first time, I saw not just pain in her eyes, but fire. Meet me tomorrow morning at the whaling station. But be warned, Tom. If Bert didn't run, but was taken, it means someone is still guarding this secret. I drove back to my dilapidated house. I laid the sextant and Esther's journal out on the old wooden table. My mind, trained in logic, started building a plan. I was using the sextant not as a navigation tool, but as a key or a cipher. I saw that the brass plate had small, illogical scratches. I photographed them. I couldn't sleep. The scratches were too precise to be random. A sextant determines position. Position means coordinates. I used my old laptop to analyze the photos. I overlaid the scratch lines onto an old map of Cape Cod. The scratches pointed to 3 locations, 3 lighthouses, Helena Light, the Truro Light, and a third one, far to the north. Esther's diary had a phrase, "If the light from 3 stars converges, Bert can come home." 3 stars, I whispered. They aren't stars, they are 3 lighthouses. The whaling station was a skeleton abandoned on the shore. There were no tourists here, just the 2 of us and the gulls' cries. Emily was punctual. She brought a thermos of coffee. It was the first thing I had genuinely enjoyed drinking all year. We were a team, even if we hadn't admitted it yet. 3 lighthouses? Emily mused as we walked toward the old, dilapidated control room. Helena, Truro, and one up north. Bert knew a lot about old sea legends. A triple convergence like that is often a beacon for treasure. I explained the scratches on the sextant. Bert was a code breaker. He wasn't using the sextant for navigation. He was using it as a template. The scratches aren't damage. They are lines of sight on an old chart. We entered the control room. It was empty, except for a pile of rusty equipment. Emily pointed at the ceiling. My father said Bert often fixed the signal lamps here. He would sit here for hours. The light cannot reach the water, I repeated Esther's line. That was the key. The lighthouse light wasn't supposed to fall directly on the maps. We searched every corner, but nothing. I looked at the old, greasy map of the bay tacked to the wall. I felt like I was back in a classroom, solving a puzzle. Only here, the stake was a man's honor. Bert didn't hide the maps inside the building, I realized. He hid them beyond the light's reach. Emily walked to the window where the signal lamp once shone. When the light from this station hits the bay, where is the darkest spot? I squinted. Right below the bluff where the station stood was a small stone cave. It stayed in shadow, even at noon. We climbed down. Cold water splashed into the cave's mouth. Inside was dark and smelled of seaweed. I shone my flashlight. On the cave wall, just above the high tide line, the letter B was carved. Beneath the letter was a small indentation, sealed with cement. Bert didn't want this found accidentally. We worked together. I used my old army knife, the only thing I'd brought from Boston, and Emily held the light. I felt like a team for the first time in a year. After half an hour, we pried the cement out. Inside the recess was a metal pipe, sealed at both ends. "Here they are, the maps," Emily whispered. Inside the pipe was not a stack of maps, but one quarter-folded piece of parchment. It wasn't a nautical route, but a highly detailed building blueprint. It was the blueprint of an old, massive church. The signature read, St. Jerome, 1968. St. Jerome's Church? That's in New Bedford. Emily recognized the handwriting. This isn't maps. This is a plan. A church blueprint? I was baffled. What do lighthouses have to do with a church? If Bert was kidnapped, it means the secret is guarded by people, not a storm. Just then, in the distance, I noticed it. A black, unmarked sedan stopped on the main road leading to the whaling station. Two men in dark jackets got out. They were not tourists. They were looking straight at us. Time to go, Emily. We just woke up a 50-year-old sleep. We didn't look back. I sped down Route 6, which snaked through the pine forests of Cape Cod. In the rearview mirror, I saw only dust. But I knew they were close. Those two in the sedan weren't cops. They were the guardians of the secret we had just disturbed. Emily sat beside me, tightly clutching the metal pipe containing the church blueprint. "Did you see their faces?" I asked. "I did. Empty, as if they were looking for a thing, not us," Emily replied. She took a ragged breath. "Tom, this isn't a riddle game. My father disappeared shortly after Bert. He just went fishing and never returned. The Coast Guard wrote it off as a storm, but I know it was the same old sleep they put on Cape Cod." In that moment, I understood. Emily wasn't just helping me for the honor of her father's friend. She was searching for the truth about her own father. This mystery was her personal unfinished business. Her deep motive was clear now. We only stopped for coffee and gas in Brewster. "St. Jerome's Church in New Bedford," I said, spreading the map. "It's a city rich with whaling history. But what do the lighthouses have to do with it? 3 points on the sextant. 3 lighthouses, Tom." I pulled out Esther's diary again. The light cannot reach the water. "A sextant measures the altitude of stars above the horizon," I explained. "The stars in Esther's journal are the lighthouses. Lighthouses shine, but one of the 3 had to be blind." Blind? Emily asked. In 1968, when Bert disappeared, one of those 3 lighthouses had to be deactivated or incomplete. That would create a blind spot in the navigation system. Bert's hiding place must be where the triple navigation light could not reach. We found old nautical directories on my phone, and there it was. The Sage Island Light, the northernmost of the 3, had been decommissioned in 1967, a year before Bert vanished. But the chart remained in old navigation systems. Bert knew the light wouldn't hit there, Emily whispered. The safe must be there. The safe? We're driving to a church, I counted. We have a church blueprint. A church blueprint? Emily looked at me with new, fierce determination. Bert was smart. He hid the key in the cave. But he hid the main treasure in a place where he didn't need a lighthouse, a place where he needed faith. The church is the new lighthouse. As we spoke, the black sedan pulled into the corner of the gas station, the very same one. "Let's go, Tom." Adrenaline spiked. We jumped into the car, leaving them to argue about the payment. Emily, my accidental accomplice, was now the only person who truly understood me. Her fire was chasing away my own inner grayness. I stopped thinking of Sarah with hopelessness. I started thinking of her with strength. We parked several blocks away from St. Jerome's Church in New Bedford. It was a massive stone structure built by the whaling captains who wanted to ensure their souls were saved despite their dirty trade. "A church blueprint. It's genius," Emily whispered. "No one would look for a hidden truth inside the house of God." Exactly, I agreed. Bert needed a safe, guarded, not by locks, but by faith and public reverence. And an old church is the perfect place. We walked inside. It was quiet, smelling of old wax and age. I pulled out the folded parchment, the church plan. "Look here," I pointed to the blueprint. "This isn't just a diagram, it's a plan of the old crypt. It sits directly beneath the main altar. And right here," I circled a spot, "it marks where builders installed the new organ in 1968. "A crypt under the organ?" Emily asked, surprised. "Yes, and there's a note here, Esther's handwriting. The keeper is here." We found the old church attendant, Brother Michael, cleaning the altar. I introduced myself as a historian studying New Bedford's maritime traditions. "May I see the crypt? They say legendary whaling captains are buried there," I asked. Brother Michael, an elderly, tired man, sighed. "No one has been down there for decades. It's sealed, but the passage is through the old organ room." He led us to a small wooden door behind the altar. Inside, in the shadow of the massive organ pipes, was a staircase leading down. "It might be dusty and rats," Michael warned. "That won't stop us," I replied. We descended. The crypt was cold and damp. I felt like an archaeologist rooting through someone else's past. The light from my flashlight slid across 18th century headstones. We found the spot marked on the blueprint, right under the organ's foundation. There was no coffin. There was only one granite slab, clearly moved before. Emily and I put all our effort into it. We pushed until the granite yielded. Beneath it was a narrow vertical shaft. Bert wasn't hiding something, he was dropping something, Emily whispered. "But what?" I shone my flashlight down. The shaft was shallow. At the bottom lay a metal capsule the size of a wine bottle. I pulled it up. It was heavy and cold. Engraved on it was Jones, S.I., Light, 1968. I gasped. Jones, that was Emily's father's last name. That's not Bert's, that's my father's. Emily pressed the capsule to her chest. Tears welled up in her eyes. Bert didn't run. He was trying to save my father. The mystery was no longer an abstract puzzle. It was raw, personal pain. Just then, we heard it. The creak of the organ. Someone was upstairs, and they clearly knew we were here. The sound was loud, piercing, and definitely a warning. "It's them," I whispered. "They found our trail the moment we reached New Bedford. We need to leave, now." We sped away from New Bedford. The screech of the organ still rang in my ears. It wasn't a call to prayer. It was a signal for the chase. Emily gripped the metal capsule tightly, as if it held the last message from her father. "They've been following us since the whaling station. How did they know we were at the church?" I asked. "If they wanted to stop us, they would have done it in the cave." "They want us to lead them to the final goal," Emily realized. We pulled off the highway and found a quiet spot, an old abandoned shipyard in Falmouth. I parked among the rusty fishing trawlers. It felt safe, but temporary. The capsule was sealed. I used my flashlight and my army knife to pry it open. Emily watched, unblinking. Her pain and hope were mixed in a single gaze. "This is your father, Emily. We will find the truth," I said, realizing those words were as much for her as for myself. The capsule opened with a soft hiss. Inside was folded yellowed parchment, but not just one. There were 3 photographs and 2 documents. The photos showed Bert, Jones, Emily's father, and a third man in Navy uniform. They were standing in front of the Sage Island Light, the very lighthouse that had been decommissioned. The first document was a dossier, stamped secret and dated 1968. I began to read aloud. "Illegal Disposal Report, U.S. Navy. 30 tons of toxic chemicals scheduled for dumping into Massachusetts Bay under a secret government project. Operation Code Starfish." Emily gasped. "Illegal dumping? But why?" "Because it was cheap," I answered, shaking my head. Bert was the lighthouse keeper. Jones was the fisherman. And the third man was from the Navy. They discovered the plot, and they sealed the information. There was a note written in Bert's hand. "We can't go to the authorities. The corruption runs too deep. We will hide the dossier where no one would think to look, by the lighthouse that doesn't shine." But the capsule didn't contain the dossier. It was only the key to the dossier. The second document was a page from a ship's log with coordinates drawn by hand. Bert knew Esther couldn't open the safe alone. He left her a chain of clues. Sextant, cave, church, I realized. The truth itself is hidden on Sage Island. Emily's eyes burned with fierce anger. "My father knew about the poison they were going to dump in our water. They didn't run, Tom. They were eliminated to keep the starfish secret safe. We weren't looking for purpose anymore. We were looking for justice." Just then, Emily grabbed my arm. "Tom, look!" The black sedan pulled up onto the shipyard road. They got out. 2 men. They clearly didn't want us to leave. "We need a boat," I whispered, "and fast. They know we know about Sage." We were cornered. The 2 men in dark jackets moved slowly but surely across the shipyard. They knew that on this abandoned dock, we had nowhere to run but into the water. "We need a boat," Emily whispered. "We don't have time to find someone who believes us." I looked at the rusty, decommissioned trawlers. Then my eyes fell on the Old Sarah, a small but sturdy fishing boat that looked relatively well maintained. That one, I pointed. It has a name. Old Sarah. That's a sign. I felt a pang of nostalgia. Sarah was my lighthouse, and now I had to use her name to save myself. We sprinted toward the pier. The men quickened their pace. I have a historian's skills, not a thief's, I said. I don't know how to start this thing. My father had the same engine, Emily replied, her hands already searching beneath the dashboard. Fishermen don't like locks, they trust anchors. While Emily was hot-wiring the engine, I moved to distract our pursuers. I grabbed an old spool of thick nylon rope and threw it into a pile of metal barrels. The clanging was loud and sharp. The men, who were now 30 feet away, reacted and turned their heads toward the noise. That gave Emily precious seconds. The engine roared to life. It sounded like an old, angry lion. We shoved off the pier. The sedan screeched to a halt right at the edge of the dock. One of the men raised his arm. There was a glint of metal. "Get down!" I yelled, and we both dropped. A bullet tore through the old, dirty canvas roof. We were out in the open water of Falmouth Bay. The pursuers didn't fire a second time, too much attention. But they would know exactly where we were headed. Emily took the wheel. Joy shone in her eyes, not from escaping, but from acting. "Thank you," she said, her voice low against the wind, "for not being afraid." I was afraid, but the fear of them is less than the fear of an empty life, I admitted. It was the deepest truth I'd spoken all year. "The maps!" Emily's determination returned. "Sage Island is in Massachusetts Bay, about 20 miles north of here. We have to get there before dark." As we cut through the waves, I studied the ship's log. The page Bert hid wasn't just coordinates, it was a route map, how to navigate the shoals and where to anchor at Sage Island. At those coordinates was a drawing, the image of a fish, not a specific species, just a symbol. I suddenly remembered Esther's words. Bert was the best sailor on Cape Cod. "A fish," I told Emily. "It's more than a symbol." Bert was a lighthouse keeper, but he and Jones were fishermen. The fish is a code sign or a route marker. I overlaid the drawing onto a modern chart. The fish symbol pointed to a sunken barge, used in the 1960s for offloading. The barge was located directly in the blind spot of the deactivated lighthouse. Bert and Jones wanted to drop the dossier into the barge, Emily realized. They thought it would hide their truth forever, but they didn't make it. The goal was clear. We needed to find the sunken barge near Sage Island. The waves grew heavier. We approached Sage Island at sunset. The island felt dead. The lighthouse stood like a massive, blind ghost whose purpose had been forgotten. There wasn't a soul around. "It was deactivated in '67, Emily whispered, looking at the light. But Bert and my father knew that this very failure of light would be the perfect place to hide such a huge truth. We moored the Old Sarah in a small, murky cove, using the old, rusty moorings. "We need to go. This is our only window," I said. The sun was dipping fast, and the light was fading. Our greatest advantage was quickly becoming a liability. I took an old, heavy fish finder, sonar, from the boat. As a former history professor, I never thought I'd be using sonar to look for a sunken dossier. Emily took the wheel to guide the boat slowly.
Using Bert's coordinates, I started scanning the bottom. The barge must be here. It has to be right in the dead zone of the lighthouse. If the light worked, it would be visible, but...
Quiet, Tom. Emily suddenly put a finger to her lips. Listen. I heard it. The distant roar of an engine. A second boat. They had found us. The pursuers had chartered a vessel and were closing in. Adrenaline made me work faster. I hit the button. The fish finder buzzed. Got it! I pointed at the screen. 10 feet below us, large, flat structure. That's the barge, the starfish. I was a historian. I knew starfish was the code for the dumping operation. The barge was the crime scene. We didn't have scuba gear. We only had 2 rusty fishing anchors and stainless steel cable. We can't dive, Emily said. It's too deep and dark. We won't dive, I replied. We'll haul it up. It was the most insane plan I'd ever conceived, but those are often the ones that work. We secured one anchor to the bow and another to the stern. Emily manually lowered the heavy anchor, aiming to hook the submerged structure. I felt a solid catch. Full speed ahead, Emily. Slowly. The boat groaned, but it pulled. We didn't lift the entire barge, just its aft, rotted side. Bubbles rose to the surface, and then a yellow, buoyant container. A Navy container. It was watertight. The dossier. Just then, the pursuer's boat roared around the rocks. They saw us and the yellow container. They're here, Tom. They're closing in, Emily yelled, gripping the wheel. We have the truth, Emily, I said, clutching the container. Now we just need the world to know it. Their boat was faster, but ours was more maneuverable. I clutched the yellow container, the dossier. This was the truth that Bert and Jones had tried to preserve with their lives. We can't outrun them in the open water, Tom, Emily shouted, dodging the waves. They'll just ram us. I looked at the shore, the blind lighthouse. The lighthouse, I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline mixed with logic. Esther said, I will wait by the lighthouse. The lighthouse is not just a hiding place, it's a trap. I handed the container to Emily. You have to hide this. Go to the lighthouse, hide it where the light cannot reach, and I will delay them. Emily refused. We're a team. I was a history professor, Emily. I know how to use the terrain. Do what I say. This is the only chance. The truth must survive. Emily, knowing I wouldn't back down, ran for the shore. I sharply turned the old Sarah. The pursuers thought I was panicking. I drove the boat straight into the shallows between 2 rusty marker buoys. They followed me. It was their mistake. They were overconfident in their power. I knew that in 1968, when Bert and Jones worked here, they must have left an emergency exit. I found it, an emergency line leading from one buoy to the other. I threw the line directly into their boat's propellers. A sudden, violent grind. Their speedboat stalled 50 feet away from me. They were furious. The 2 men jumped into the cold water and swam toward the shore. One of them had a pistol. I grabbed a life vest and an ancient flare from a locker on my boat. Meanwhile, Emily was at the lighthouse. She found the old basement beneath the tower, the room where the lamp fuel was stored. I jumped onto the beach, holding the flare, which burned with a bright, angry red fire. I was a professor, but now I was the target. The men advanced. One of them, tall and bald, yelled, "Give us the container, old man! We don't want to kill you!" You've already killed 2 people for this secret, I answered calmly. Your dossier will not see the dark. I am a historian. I know that truth cannot be burned. It can only be passed on. Instead of running, I raised the flare and threw it toward the old generator beside the lighthouse. I knew from the history of Cape Cod lighthouses that old diesel generators ran on kerosene and were unstable. Whoosh! Fire engulfed the rusty barrels. It was an uncontrolled blaze. I yelled to Emily, "Run! I'm creating a diversion!" The fire and smoke forced the pursuers to retreat. They were focused on the dossier, but now their own safety was compromised. I used that moment. I ran back to the water, pushing my small boat back out to sea, leaving them stranded on Sage Island, surrounded by the fire and their failed conspiracy. We spent the night aboard the old Sarah, drifting somewhere between Truro and Boston. We were exhausted, but the dossier was safe. The fire on Sage Island would die, but the truth we found was now alive. At dawn, as the Cape Cod fog began to lift, we opened the yellow container. Inside was more than just documentation. It held the signed confessions of the third man, the Navy officer who helped Bert and Jones. He detailed the entire starfish operation and the names of the high-ranking officials who sanctioned the dumping of toxic chemicals. Among the papers was a personal note from Jones, Emily's father, addressed to his daughter. Esther and Bert covered for me. We did what we had to. I won't return. Don't look for me, but find the truth. Live, my girl, and never fear the ocean, because it is the sea that holds our honor. Emily wept. But they were not tears of loss. They were tears of justice. 55 years of uncertainty were over. Her father was a hero. We passed the dossier to my old historian friend at Boston University, who knew how to make it public without putting us at risk. Our part of the work was finished. A week later, the Jones dossier exploded across the media. High-ranking officials from 1968, many still in powerful positions, were forced to answer. The truth about the Massachusetts Bay pollution, which had cost the lives of 2 brave sailors, finally came to light. Bert and Jones were vindicated. I returned to Truro. My broken house on Cape Cod no longer felt like a place to hide. It had become a sanctuary. That day, Emily came to me. She had closed her bookstore in Provincetown. I found a new chapter, Tom, she said, smiling. You brought justice to my family. And I brought back your colors. We stood on the shore, looking at the Helena light. It was shining. I don't want to be the historian who studies loss anymore, I told her. I want to be the man who builds a new beginning. Emily took my hand. We decided to live together in that old, rickety house in Truro. We would rebuild it, brick by brick, board by board. We wouldn't spend our retirement in Tuscany, but right here on Cape Cod, where we found each other and a new purpose. I was no longer Tom Fuller, lost in grief. I was Tom Fuller, who found truth, justice, and love on the Atlantic shore. And that was the greatest discovery of my life.
If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments what you would have done if you were in Michael's place.